good evening. And may this be a very joyous season, being that we're in the month of Adar, the Hebrew month that is associated with joy and celebration, as we shall discuss, with its central holiday being Purim, that will take place this coming Sunday. So I want to wish everybody at the opening, right at the outset, all of you here, all of those in cyberspace, who are listening from the comforts of their environs, as they say, that may the joy of this month permeate and impact all of you. We should have a very joyous month and a joyous year and a joyous life. You know, joy is and celebration is a great blessing, with so much anguish and sorrow and challenges that everyone has. To be able to experience happiness, real happiness, not just superficial, but one that comes from within, is indeed a gift and a blessing. So I wish everybody that blessing as we begin this discussion this evening, this class. Being that Purim is coming right up, and also this year it's a unique schedule, because being that Purim is on Sunday, so you may be familiar with the fact that the day preceding Purim is always a fast day, called the Fast of Esther. The Megillah, the story of Purim, talks about the fast that Esther asked the Jews at the time of the decree, Haman's decree, calling for the annihilation of all the Jews. So she suggested to Mordechai that the Jewish people fast, in a sense, a type of penitence, a type of prayer, a type of beseeching God to abolish the decree. So every year, right before Purim, we remember not just the celebration of Purim, the miracle, but we also remember what preceded it. What preceded it, which is the fast. But here's the problem. And you know, in Jews there's always the complications and legalities and issues, and then we have to find the solutions. The problem is, on Shabbat, you're not supposed to fast. So what happens this year when Purim is on Sunday? You can't fast on Sunday, that's the holiday. Friday is also not supposed to be a fast day because Friday prepares to Shabbat. So what happens is that tomorrow, Thursday, becomes the fast day. So tomorrow is a fast day, called the Fast of Esther. So in a sense, it separates Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, till Purim. So in a way, we're already entering into the Purim spirit right now, this evening, as the fast begins tomorrow morning. That's just in case you're interested in some Jewish trivia. So now you know that. I'm not going to get into the details of it and all the. There are actually pages and pages of arguments, pro and con, of why you do it this way, and all kinds of different discussions about it. So usually, if Purim, let's say, is on a Tuesday, so the Fast of Esther would be on Monday. Monday night would be the end of the fast. They pray evening service, and even before breaking the fast, you read the Megillah, and Purim begins. But in this type of schedule, the fast is on Thursday, so Saturday night is not a fast. Saturday night you read the Megillah like on a Purim, and then comes Sunday, the festivities. So that's the technical part. As you all know, that I focus here not on the technical or mechanical side of Judaism, but on the spiritual and psychological and personal. So in the spirit of us entering this season, and this entire month, as I said, the entire month is connected to the joy. So I'd like to discuss one very, I think, fundamental theme of Purim, that, and most importantly, how it impacts our lives. So Purim has many central themes, and has many unique angles. I've discussed them in different years. But the one I want to focus on tonight, as if you've gotten the reminder of the class, the topic is the hidden script of your life. We all, on a very basic level, you all had your busy day today. I don't know what you were occupied with, but overall, people either go to work or you're out of work, so maybe you didn't go to work. But but other preoccupations from the morning till the evening, and now we're sitting here. So if you look at the details of a person's life, each of us, and I'm sure, as I said, there is variation from one to the next, so I'm being more or less generic here. Life can appear very fragmented, many different fragments, and a disjointed, basically, life experience, where if you were to have to connect the dots or connect with the thread, the different activities you're involved in, you'll be quite challenged to do so. So, for instance, if you were to list everything you did today, or yesterday, take any average day. So let's say from the moment you wake up, you press the snooze button, you press it again, whatever, you get up, you exercise, you shower, you bathe. I'm not going to go through all the options, but you get the idea. You get dressed, eat breakfast, coffee. You commute, go to work, you have a meeting, one important meeting, maybe not such an important meeting, a lunch break, coffee break, tea break, the works. You may read the paper or magazine or something else. Then the day continues on, you commute back home, you may have a dinner, you may have a party, you may just hang out at home. Go through the list of activities. You'll come up with, and I've tested this, the average person has approximately, if you listed everything, from tying your shoelaces to the most important business meeting, you'll come up with approximately 100 items. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, if you really break it down. It's an exercise everyone can try. But here's the real challenge. If you were to ask them to connect a line between all these activities and all these preoccupations, whether from the most trivial to the most important, you'll discover that you won't have many activities that are interconnected. For example, tying your shoelaces or exercising in the morning has very little to do with what happens in your afternoon, in most cases. So what you end up having is a day full of fragmented pieces, some more important than others. Doesn't seem like a serious thing, but if you think about it, think of it accumulating day after day, and then week after week, and month after month, and year after year, and decade after decade, then you end up having millions and millions of these fragments that we call the minutiae of our lives, and they consume most of our life experience. So you think, okay, so what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is that we are human beings by nature, inherently. We loathe and we abhor anything that is fragmented. We always look to make some order in our lives. So psychologically, it has to begin to wear down on a person when they are being pulled in so many different directions, and so much of our time and energy is going in all these directions. And I'm not even adding into the equation the hours of therapy and the hours of the things that cause us to go to therapy that also consume so much of our psyche and of our time and of our energy. So when you add it all up, you start thinking, who's in control here? Are you in control of your life, or are your circumstances in control? We all like to feel we're in control, and at times we lash out as if we're in control, but if you really think about it, because of our responsibilities, because we have to earn a living, because we have commitments that we may not have chosen, but we must do because for survival purposes, it ends up being that the circumstances of most people's lives really are the controlling forces in their life. You may hate your job, but you have to do it because you have no other income. So what does that do to the human psyche? So when you think of the drama of our lives, the story of our lives, and if you think of it in this context, it can be quite depressing actually, because you start thinking, so what is going on in my life? What is really preoccupying and dominating my life space? The fact is, approximately a third of our lives were asleep. Okay, I don't mean spiritually, I mean physically. Spiritually asleep may be even more than a third of our lives. The other 2/3 of the time, we're really mostly focused on surviving. Surviving, I include eating, sleeping, sleeping I mentioned, eating, shopping, earning a living, paying bills. Things we may not have chosen to do if we were left our own resources, but things we have to do. because that's how you have to survive in this world. So when you come down to it, how much is really left time for something you really, really prioritize, you really enjoy? So that's why we have this thing called weekends, escapes, vacations, traveling time, or even in the day we find these little oases, whatever it is, plural of oasis, whatever it may be. These little pockets, these little corners where we try to find some peace. Some people do it through yoga, some through meditation, some of other exercises. But it's really an escape ultimately, because the rest of it is very much part of our lives. So, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but if you haven't, I'm not here actually to depress anyone, but the fact is this is the story of most people's lives. I know this because besides the fact that I also am a human being on this earth, in case you're wondering, additionally I speak to many people come to me about their issues and their problems and their challenges. And if you cut to the root of it all, it does come down to who's controlling your life. So many of us, let's say, are looking for love in our lives. So we're not even getting into now whether we are searching in the right way, whether we're looking in the right places, whether we have healthy tools as we search for love. Forget about that for a moment. The fact is, when you are so consumed and so much of our energy is being spent on so many other things that are so trivial comparatively speaking, you don't even have energy to focus on the most important things like finding a healthy, loving relationship, building a home, living up to your destiny, your calling. So spirituality in a way has become in our times almost like a medication. Like it's like a pill you take. Some type of thing you do to try to find some stability or equilibrium. But in truth, anyone that has a real spiritual experience, a true spiritual person will tell you, spirituality is not some escape into for a few moments. It's supposed to be the driving force of your life 24/7. So I'm just framing this in this context because if we want to talk about what is the real story of our lives, we have to realize, think of it like a film. So when you're in the middle of a film, there are many scenes, some positive, some negative, some terrifying, some hopeful. But we all know a film it rolls on. And you don't want to come to any conclusions until you see the end of the film. Each frame on its own is only one small detail. So when you think of your own life this way, in retrospect, whatever amount of years you look back, your life is of many frames. Some of them, as I said, are disjointed, but some of them do ultimately fall into place, and you may see a pattern or two. But you can only see it backwards. You can't see it frontwards. You don't know what frame will come tomorrow, because it's not a movie that you can just fast forward and see whether it's a happy ending or not, or what happens. Additionally, as we shall soon discuss, as opposed to a movie, when you go to a movie or you see a film, the film was created by a filmmaker, not by you. You really have your only participation is paying for the ticket and watching it. In the film of our lives, we are actually participants, and we help write the script. So you actually can help determine how your story will unfold. We are partners in the unfolding drama of our lives. So when you add that into the equation, it obviously gets a lot more complex. So really, in essence, this is the deeper story of Purim. So I'll get back to our lives in a few minutes. I want to go back to the Purim story for a moment, because you'll see how a story is told and how you can look at it on one end, superficially see it one way, and when you look with a different set of eyes, you see it a different way. The Purim story, the Megillah, which will be read, as I said, Saturday night and again Sunday, is, we call it a Megillah. A Megillah means a scroll, actually. Is the euphemism, like, he gave me a whole Megillah. That's someone who gives you a mouthful, they call it the whole Megillah. Taken from this Megillah's Purim. So Purim is the story of Purim is read in a particular tune. Sephardim and Ashkenazim have their own different traditional ways of reading the Megillah. And briefly the story, you may or may not be aware of, that the whole story from beginning to end of the book of Esther takes how many years? It takes 9 years. 9 years is approximately the whole story. When you read it, you think it's just a few months or a few weeks or within a year, but it's not so. It's 9 years. From the time Achashverosh, the king, I'm going to review the story briefly because it's relevant to our discussion here. So, from the time that Achashverosh the king, the beginning of Megillah Esther begins, Vahi b'mei melech Achashverosh. It was in the days of the king of Achashverosh. He became the ruler of Persia. And he married his wife was Vashti, the queen. And then it continues about the story, the party that he threw to celebrate his rise to leadership, to kingship, to being the king. So from that point till the end of the story is around 9 years. It's very relevant, as you'll see in a moment. Now, 9 years, maybe once they pass, they don't seem like long, but when you go through 9 years, while you're living it, it's a period of time. Think of how you were 9 years ago till today. Much has happened. So here's the story briefly, and if you think about it, you'll see an unbelievable message, which is the theme of what we're discussing. So the story continues. King Achashverosh, as I said, throws a party, invites everybody. And we're introduced to different characters along the way. First character is Vashti, the queen, who the king in his intoxication decides to want to display, show her off. She, in her pride and dignity, is not interested in being a sex object, let's put it that way. So we already have the birth of feminism all the way back in the times of Persia. And she, in turn, refuses, which of course humiliates the king. And the story continues, so the king consults with his advisors what to do. And one of his advisors, who ends up becoming Haman, he has a different name at that point, advises and says that you can't allow this precedent because women all over the kingdom will begin to rebel against their husbands and refuse to comply to their wishes. So you have to show an example, and he convinces the king to have Vashti hung. And that's exactly what happens. Afterwards, the king, of course, begins to regret his act, and so a great search begins. It's almost like quite amusing, actually, when you read it in the Megillah. This great search for the maidens of the Persian Empire, which consisted, by the way, of 127 countries. That's where the Megillah begins, because Persia then was the superpower. So think Persia of really all of civilization that was under the control of Achashverosh, which really spanned from Hodu, as the Megillah begins. Hodu is India, Kush is Ethiopia. So really the span of the Persian Empire was from India to Ethiopia. Essentially the entire, from the Far East all the way to the Mid East, all the way to Africa, which is really where civilization was centered primarily at the time. And that's the Persian Empire. And Achashverosh ruled these 127 countries, from Hodu to Kush, as I said. And so a big search goes out to find a proper queen for King Achashverosh. And the Megillah elaborates on this search and how these different women came to present themselves before the queen as all candidates for becoming queen. And of all the people he chooses a woman called Esther, who would become the heroine. Little did he know that she was Jewish. And Megillah reveals that to us, that she's the niece of Mordechai. So he's introduced as the next character, as well as Esther. Mordechai, Ish Yehudi, a Jew from Shushan, a scholar, a leader, and he too was an advisor to the king. So we have now Haman, Esther, we have Achashverosh, Haman, Esther, Mordechai. Then the story continues that it happens to be, seemingly randomly, that one day two people are plotting against the king, to assassinate the king. And they were speaking in a foreign language. But Mordechai, who was very knowledgeable, very educated, recognized the language, and he turned them in, and overthrew their plot. And it was documented in the annals of Persian annals, of King's annals, that this fact. You'll see it all comes together. Then the story continues how Haman rises in power, and he's basically he's second in command essentially, and everybody worships him because of his power, except one man, Mordechai. Mordechai la yichra v'la yishtachava, even though all the other people would bow to Haman, both I guess physically and also psychologically, he was the man in control. Mordechai was the only one that would not bow to him, which of course infuriated Haman, as the Megillah continues, and it infuriated him to the extent that he became or was, and just maybe amplified his anti-Semitism. Finally, he approaches the king with this plot against the Jewish people, and he puts it this way. He says to the king, "Yeshna am echad Among you, there is among all your nations. There's one nation, one singular nation that is spread out among all your nations, all the 127 countries. And this nation has their own customs and their own rituals. Their religion is different than all the others. It basically incites the king, as all anti-Semites did through history, that we have to annihilate these foreign people. It's actually quite, I don't want to say the word fascinating, but quite uncanny and unnerving, really, when you read, I don't want to even say that I've read it, but I have, Mein Kampf, from another Haman in the 20th century, and literally, almost word for word, his words, how he talks about Jews, is what Haman said to Achashverosh. Whether he read the Megillah or not, I don't know, but I'm sure he did. These people are big experts in the biblical literature and Talmudic literature. But it's interesting, the parallel. So Haman incites and convinces the king to pass a decree, which would be, on a certain day, he throws lots, and hence the name Purim. Purim comes from the word pur, hagoyrel, the Megillah says. Pur in in Persian means, and also Aramaic, it means a lot. He threw lots, because Haman was somewhat of a, they say, sorcerer, so he believed in certain superstitious stuff, and he threw lot that what day was designated, the 14th day of Adar, would be designated as the day when the Jews would be killed. And 13th, 14th. And that's it, that's the decree. Now this was not a small matter. Hitler had control over Europe, but here we're talking about a kingdom that would control the Jews everywhere. There were no other place, there was nowhere to run. So this was a decree against the entire Jewish nation, spread out in all these 127 countries, from India, as I said, to Ethiopia. So this was like a total genocide, had the decree, God forbid, been fulfilled. When Mordechai hears about the decree, he sits in mourning. He takes a sack and mourning cloth and sits in mourning because of the tragedy that is about to befall his people. He then turns to Esther. He gets her message that you have to do something about this. And he tells her, maybe this is the reason you became queen, just to do something about the situation here. Anyway, the story continues how Esther instructs Mordechai to gather the Jews and pray, as I said earlier, fast. And then the other end of things, the Megillah continues and begins another section with maybe the most random part of it all, that one night, one night, this is more dramatic, I guess, when you hear it in the Megillah, when you read it on Purim, right? I'm saying that in contemporary English. One night, the king has insomnia. You've ever had insomnia? No? Couldn't sleep. So the king couldn't sleep, and as a result, basically, the miracle happens. So next time you have insomnia, don't think it's always a negative thing. There may be some good reason for it. What happens? The king can't sleep, and in order to soothe him and get him back to sleep, he calls some of his assistants to read for him. And what do they read? They read the annals. They read what would it be called? The history of the kingdom. All about his exploits and all his conquests and so on. And the page it turns to is the story how Mordechai overheard the plot a while earlier, probably years earlier, of the plot against the king, which he foiled, and it saved the king's life. So the king suddenly has aroused a certain compassion and love for this man who saved him. So he tells his assistants, come, call whoever's out in the courtyard, call them in. And Haman happened to be hanging out there. So he calls him in and says to him, in cryptic language, he says, what would you do for someone that saved the king's life? So he thought the king was talking about him and his vanity. So he came up with a great plan. He says, I would have the king's horse and the king's garments, and I put him on a horse, and I have someone lead the horse through the whole city of Shushan, which was the capital of Persia, which, by the way, is modern-day Iraq. Iran, if you just need to know the geography, so it's also quite relevant. And I would have them announce in the streets, this is what is done to honor a man who saved the king's life, or the king loves the king, to bring honor to the king. As the king, Achashverosh, hears Haman's description, he says, okay, now I want you to do exactly that to a man called Mordechai. Of course, Haman is quite disturbed, quite overwhelmed by this, but he ends up having to walk through the streets with Mordechai on the horse, proclaiming Mordechai's greatness. That's what the king decreed. Anyway, the story continues how the days count down to the decree, and finally Esther comes up with a plan. What she does is she invites the king and Haman to a meal. She prepares a special meal. Haman feels very honored because he's going to sit with the king and the queen. It just fed into his sense of self. And after the meal, Esther decides she's going to wait, and she invites them to another meal, basically to butter them up and warm them up. And then finally, she approaches the king, and the king, in his love to her, says, "What can I do for you? Anything, I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom." This is his expression. So she says, "There's someone who is plotting to kill me and my entire people." And that's when she reveals to King Ahasuerus that she's Jewish. And who's this man? She points to Haman. He comes pleading for mercy. The bottom line is the king, who clearly, as the Talmud says, is a fachfach. He seems to be very, what can we say? Some people translate hafachfach as bipolar. I don't know if we can really diagnose Ahasuerus as that, but hafachfach definitely means a personality, mood swings, and a lot of changes. So Ahasuerus, he hears this, he says, really? And in his love for Esther, he has Haman hung on the gallows that he prepared for Mordechai. And then things, of course, take a turn for the better. Because once the king senses and feels, well, he wants to protect Esther, they have the decree reversed, and instead of the day, which we could celebrate Purim as being a day of destruction and genocide and annihilation, it becomes a day of great celebration. And that's how the Megillah concludes, how the Jews turned this into a holiday. Not just a day that you just forget about the negative things that happened, they actually transformed it into a holiday. So we can thank Haman for giving us yet another holiday. Holiday of Purim, great celebration, transformation, and we celebrate it through festivities, through a festive meal, through sending gifts to each other, food parcels, and matanos lavyanim, which are gifts to the poor, and reading the Megillah and other things that we do on Purim traditionally or according to Jewish law and so on. That's the story. Now, it's a story, it's a miracle. Obviously, it's a great miracle because it literally could have been the end of the Jewish people as we know them. But beyond that, the thing I want to emphasize here is because the 9 years that I was discussing. If you were living at the time and living through this whole story, what would you have sensed? You wouldn't have sensed anything really happening. Because if you think about it, think of it being in the time period, not looking back in retrospect as we have today perspective, so we can know that all these dots are connected. So it happens to be a king becomes a king. It happens to be that Vashti, he kills his wife. It happens to be that he searches for a new queen. She happens to be Esther. It happens to be that that Mordechai overhears this conspiracy. It happens to be that the king has insomnia one night, can't sleep. If you think of it, living through it, moment to moment, all these things would be random events that we have no clue that they were leading anywhere. Who would think the king can't sleep one night? What connection does it have to anything? Or that Mordechai overheard a conspiracy. But the way the Megillah tells the story, which now we know in retrospect what's going on, you see another complete different story emerging. That whether we understood it at the time or not, whether it seems random or not, there's definitely a script taking place that's leading to a very particular conclusion. And had Esther not been in the place where she was, and had Mordechai not overheard the conversation, the plot, and had the king not had insomnia, and so on and so forth, any one of those things didn't happen at the right moment, at the right time, the whole story of Purim would never have taken place. So what you have here is a real example of our own lives. You think your life is different? It's not. The only difference is you're living through it right now, and you cannot see the forests for the trees. I looked that up. I always thought it was forest from the trees, and then someone told me it's for the trees. I don't know, but that's the way it is. Rabbi Google, that's what Google says, and that's it. Final authority. So when we're in the forest, we see the trees. And it's hard for us to see a perspective, to see the bird's eye view of our own lives. Sometimes we're blessed to see backwards. You can look back and say, I understand now why by losing a job 2-3 years ago, actually ended up becoming a great blessing. But sometimes we don't see it. The key thing is to remember, and humbly remember, that just because you don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not happening. The Jews, and all the people at the time of Purim, also didn't see anything. Which explains a very important question, which is of all the books of the Bible, all of them, the whole Tanakh, God, of course, is mentioned thousands and thousands of times, except in one book, the book of Esther. You will not find any reference to the word God. Not in any of his names. There's usually 7 different names that we use for God, associate with God. You have the name Yudke Vovke, or Havaya, which we don't pronounce. You have Elokim, you have Adnai, you have Kael, you have Tzvokos, you have Shaddai, you have many, many names. Not one name is used in the Megillah referring to God. There are some verses whose acronym, the Rosh Tevis or Sofet Tevis, the acronym of the words, spell out the name of God. But it's all hidden. Now this is not an oversight. Now clearly, the whole Megillah story is to tell us about a miracle, and a miracle that was definitely choreographed by God. So why is God's name never mentioned? So the mystics explain, and that there are 2 types of miracles in our lives. One is called a nes goloi, a revealed nes, a revealed miracle, and one is called a nes melubash b'teva, a miracle that's dressed up in the garments of nature. It's still a miracle, but it looks natural. So events that are open miracles would be, whether it's a medical miracle or different miracles in the Bible, clearly some type of suspension of nature or defying any type of logic or any type of prediction. Oh, the doctor says that was a miracle. Because medically or scientifically it didn't seem possible. The impossible happened. Not getting into whether you can explain that too in some natural ways, but definitely was not what was predictable. Then there's another miracle that's concealed, and hence God's name is concealed. It's a miracle that plays itself out through natural ways. When you look at it on the outside, everything seems to be normal. Meaning conventional. But when you look at the result, you find out, hey, how did that happen? Why did I end up in this place and hear this message? And as a result of that, some salvation came my way. So you may not even notice it till it happens, till after it happens. And even then you may not even appreciate it. Like they tell the story of the Baal Shem Tov, that once, God forbid, tragically, a young girl got paralyzed. And she couldn't move her legs. And they went to different doctors, and they couldn't find any solution. So finally, the mother says to the father, you know what, we should go to this man they call the Holy Baal Shem Tov. Holy Baal Shem Tov. Who's this man? He says he's a miracle worker. He can pray, he can do things that are not natural. Maybe he could help our daughter. So her husband started laughing. He says, there's these crazy Hasidim, with some superstitious stuff. I don't believe in this whole thing. I'm not going to some magic worker. Anyway, mother's a mother, and she says, listen, you're not going, I'm going. I have nothing to lose. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it works, what are you going to, He says, I can't accept it. But she says, listen, you're coming with me, you don't coming with me. So reluctantly, his wife wants to go. What's he going to say? He's not going to go. So he goes with her, laughing all along the way, cynical of the whole experience. So they come to the Baal Shem Tov, they wait a little while. The daughter they leave in the carriage because she can't walk, so they kept her in the wagon outside. They come to the Baal Shem Tov, and she pours out her heart. They have a daughter. She was all well and healthy. And one day suddenly her legs would stop working. Start crying and crying. The man is standing quite respectfully. He's not saying anything. Inside he's, doesn't think anything's going to come of this. So the Baal Shem Tov turns to her husband and says, and what do you think? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one line. So the Baal Shem Tov says, and what can I do while you're here? So they say, you're a miracle worker. And maybe you can do something that doctors can't do. So the Baal Shem Tov turns to her husband and says, and what do you think? So he didn't want to say, I think you're a scam, con artist. So he said, well, I don't really believe in miracles. Let's put it this way. So Baal Shem Tov says, okay, listen, a miracle definitely can't work if you don't believe in it. So I don't know if you came to the right place. And the woman begins yelling at her husband. She says, who's asking you? I'm here, and I came, and I trust this man. I want to see if he can do something. You know? So her husband, what is he supposed to do? Anyway, the Baal Shem Tov felt a compassion for a mother, so suddenly he opens up his drawer, and in his drawer he had a bag of coins, and he throws the coins on the floor. And her husband starts telling his wife, this guy's something the matter with him. Why is he throwing coins on the floor? Anyway, suddenly, to their all surprise, the girl walks into the room. She got off the carriage, she walks into the room and picks up the coins from the floor. She heard the coins out the window and she came in. She was like shocked. She hadn't been walking for a few years. She had given up hope. So the woman, of course, is like, beyond herself, the mother. And the father says to her, listen, let's get out of here fast before the Baal Shem Tov takes credit for this too. That's how he saw it. He saw it as completely, there was nothing to do with it. The girl started walking before he takes credit for it. So sometimes a miracle can happen and you don't even know that it happened. You don't appreciate it because your own cynicism or you're jaded, that it shrouds the possibility. Today they talk a lot about the power of attraction. Right. Well, for Jews there was always the concept of trach gut, v'zayin gut. Have you ever heard that expression? It means think good and it will be good. So some see that as some type of nice, cute statement. Yeah, if you're optimistic, anyway, the odds are possible 50-50 will work, so why not be optimistic? But that's not what the statement means. The statement actually means that you can change things for the better if your attitude changes. In other words, you can't shape your reality. Now, you may say, well, how's that possible? I don't know if any of you saw a few years ago, they came out with this film, What the Bleep Do We Know? Anybody into that? You can check it out online. What the bleep do we know? That's the word bleep. I'm not missing the word. That's the way they call it. And it's an interesting film. It's about the power of attraction. It's about think good and will be good. It's somewhat psychological, and you can even say quantum physics stuff in there. And one of the things that struck me about it, which is very much parallels mystical thought, is the idea, I think the way they put it was, the way your neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. Remember that our attitudes are not just psychological attitudes, they actually are brain patterns. They're brain waves, and they charge different neurons. When a person is happy, neurons in the brain work differently than when you're not. So the line is, how they are fired, that's how they get wired. When you have consistent negative attitude to things, actually your neurons change and they become wired that way. And people who have a positive attitude, that also affects how things happen. That doesn't mean that you can suddenly change reality in the physical sense of the word, but it definitely has impact. Just to give an example, very simple example. God forbid a person is in a hospital, not well, and they have no visitors. Just a comparative case study here. No visitors. Nobody comes to visit this person. And then you have another person who has many visitors, family, loved ones, constantly coming to visit. You think there's an impact and a difference between these two people's healing ability? I'm not just talking about how many flowers they get and the distractions they have. There's no question about it. Optimism has a direct physical, chemical impact on the human being. It releases different energies and strengthens your immune system. When you believe and you have hope, there's no question it can help strengthen your willpower, can strengthen the rest of you. When you have no hope, and you give up, resignation has a physical impact. It's not just a psychological thing. It has a physical impact on the human being. Is it guaranteed that a person who has many visitors is suddenly going to get better? Obviously, it's not guaranteed in the medical sense of the word. But does it strengthen a person's immune system to fight? There's no question about it. It's no different than when a soldier goes to war and they wear a helmet. Is it guaranteed if you wear a helmet that, God forbid, you won't be killed? No, it's not guaranteed, but it definitely heightens the chances. It's a protection. So the same thing is in this sense of it. And there are many chemicals today, whether it's adrenaline or other chemicals that are released when a person has a different attitude to things. So this isn't just some type of mumbo-jumbo, a magical thing. Attitudes do impact. You go into somebody when you're depressed or you're in pain, suffering, and you go to somebody who has no hope and is a resigned person, it's definitely not going to make you feel better. You go to somebody that has strength and confidence in you, it changes things. You talk about great athletes, superstars. They'll tell you many times the big thing that changed was the coach they had. Because the same person with the same skills and talents, without someone that had confidence in them, you can start doubting yourself, you can make a mistake, and then become weak. Psychological strength and vigilance is just as important as actual skill, because it affects what you feel you're capable of. So sometimes it's the person you meet and the person you're around that can have a direct physical impact on you. These are just some examples. There are many, many more, and they're just beginning to be documented actually in medicine, because something we were not aware of, because it's more subtle and it's not empirically so obvious. So to go back to the story, the fact is of our lives, our stories, the Megillah story is meant to be our story. We're not just reading a Persian miracle that happened a few thousand years ago. You're reading a story of your life. Your life has all the ups and downs that the Megillah tells. There's times of great joy and celebration. There are times of being at the brink of the abyss, where all seems lost. And it's all about understanding that there's another script that's playing itself out, and there are things you can do to facilitate, or precipitate, you can say, the playing out of a drama that will have a happy ending as opposed to a non-happy one. Because besides what I said earlier, that all these pieces had to happen exactly the way they happened, and we could only understand it in retrospect, there were also some choices made. It wasn't just that. Mordechai had no clue what's going to happen. He doesn't say, but he was confident that we can do something about it. So there's an exchange that I referred to earlier briefly between him and Esther, when he says to Esther that you have to do something about this. And he actually is very sharp. He says, because if you don't bring the salvation, it'll come from somewhere else. So don't think that you're... And then he concludes and says, and perhaps this is the reason you rose to power, that you became a queen. It's an interesting statement. It's saying that all of us, when you're in a position, a situation, perhaps that's the reason you're in that situation. To act, because you have the power to do something about it. Just think about that line. Have we always used the position that we were in to do something about a situation that seemed that was threatening them? And statistics show that, sadly, tragically, if a person is being mugged in the street, many people will ignore it, even if they see it, and just move on. So usually you explain it because they're afraid, they don't want to be hurt. But it's not just that. It's indifference, and it's also selfish, basically. But think about, how would you like to be in that position? That something's happening to you and everybody walks by and ignores it. One of the worst things possible. So Mordechai was saying to Esther, you're in a position of power for this particular reason. Had Mordechai not said it, had Esther not acted, that also would have changed the whole story. So in addition to the fact that we don't see the script of our lives, there's another thing. It has consequences. Because if you don't see the script, you'll say, listen, really, who cares whether I'll act or won't act? That's not the case. The fact that you believe and know that there's another script that's taking place behind the scenes means that you have a responsibility, and your responsibility can also shape the outcome. So this isn't just meant to be a heavy trip on us of how responsible we are. It's really meant to give us an alternative of how to look at our lives. So going back to what I said earlier about the connecting the dots, the fact of the matter is we are more or less in bondage. We are enslaved to our schedules and to our responsibilities and our commitments. It controls us. That may sound harsh to some of us, but I think, if you're really honest, it's the fact. And I include myself in the lot. Time to time, you wake up and you realize that you're trapped in certain things. Something may even be good things. Sometimes it takes, God forbid, an emergency or a situation that you have to change your regimen, and suddenly realize you can function without those habits, without that whole schedule. Or you travel for a while and you can't use your BlackBerry or your telephone or all other communications that we have, and you realize you don't fall apart. It can be a drug as well. I'm not suggesting that technology doesn't have its benefits, but it definitely can be a drug, and has become one. A thing that you sit in meetings, people's attention span, what they're focusing on. When's the last time you had an eye-to-eye conversation for more than 20 minutes with another person? Well, it's not that simple today, when we have all kinds of voices and rings beckoning us. So the fact is that we have our schedules and our details. Purim is a day, And the reading of the Megillah is an opportunity to think of your own life in the same context. What is the pattern? What is unfolding? So Kierkegaard, the philosopher, wrote that we must live our lives frontwards, but we can only understand it backwards. Or the other way around. You can only understand it backwards, but you must live it frontwards. You live it frame by frame, as I said. And you really cannot really understand it only in retrospect. Now, I'm not suggesting that a negative experience suddenly becomes a positive one because it may turn into something positive. Fact is, pain, and we will go through it in our lives. But when you do have the humility to realize that there's another script in your life, it somewhat blunts the pain. It's not quite that extreme. Again, that doesn't mean it's not there, and it's not a justification for it, but it gives context to things. And the same thing is with extreme joy. The more mature a person becomes, the more they realize that there's a bigger story unfolding in each of our lives. And being able to appreciate it and stepping back is the essence of what the Purim story is all about. There's the story of salvation, there's the story of transforming darkness into light, and all the other themes of Purim. But what I'm focusing on this evening is the story of our lives. That the story of our lives is a script that you do not see and that I don't see. We can help each other see it, but the first step is to know that. Because if you think you have it all figured out, that's the first enemy. Where they say, Yedias Hamachla is a Chetzi Refuah. The awareness of an illness is half the cure. What they call today denial. What is denial? It's not the river Nile, right? That's what they say. Denial. So when someone says to you, for instance, which I often ask people, do you think you have any blind spots? And they say, yes, I do, but I know what they are. Okay, what do you think that means? That. So the Baal Shem Tov puts it this way. There's a thing called a Hester, Purim, where the face is concealed, or a reality is concealed from us. But then there's a verse in the Torah in the Parsha Vayelech, at the end of the Bible, in the last book of Deuteronomy, that says, Haster Aster Ponai, twice. It doesn't just say concealed, the face is concealed, it says it's concealed and it's concealed. So the Baal Shem Tov says, a very powerful statement. He says that there are two types of concealment. There's a concealment, something is covered, and you know it's dark. Like we know, an average person knows when the sun goes down and night falls, it's night, it's not day. This is day, this is night. So it's concealed, the light is concealed, and you're aware of it. But then there's a concealment that's so intense that it conceals the fact that it's concealed. So Haster means it conceals the concealment. So you can convince yourself that day is night. And that the truth is false. Or as Orwell puts it, war is peace, and so on. And knowledge is ignorance, and ignorance is knowledge. The whole, whatever, the newspeak of the future 1984. So there's a situation of denial that you convince yourself everything is pretty good. Whether we do it out of pride, or we do it out of ignorance, or we actually do it because we're really convinced that it is, it doesn't really matter. Bottom line is, a person like that is very difficult to do anything, because they think everything is fine. There's no problem. Not even dark. In the olden days, before there was air conditioning, there was very severe heat in Russia, so they had these basements that were beneath the ground, and you can go down there for some relief on a very sweltering day. Now these basements, since there was also no electricity, these basements were dark. So once a chassid went down to one of these basements to just get some relief, a hot day, and he comes downstairs and he suddenly yells out, "It's so dark here." So the other people who were there for a while said, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it soon." He says, "That's what I'm worried about, to get used to it." So in other words, the fact that you get used to that you don't see things well convinces you that you start seeing. That's just not true. What happens is you start convincing yourself that that blindness is sight, and that's not the case. This is very relevant to all psychological situations, because we're all not just capable of this, but we all do it. If you catch yourself doing it, you're already in good shape, because it means it's not a double covering. The problem is when you don't catch yourself and you can't even see it. So what do? What solution is there if you cannot see that you cannot see, basically? In other words, you do not know there's a problem. How can you solve that? Well, it takes one thing to solve that. It takes humility. To know that you don't have it all figured out. The first step to all greatness, to all healing, to all movement. If you think you have it figured out, you'll be stuck in the way you have it figured out, basically. And that's it. That will be your tools. The people who learn to grow, and I'm not just talking about growing from a negative, unhealthy situation to healthy. I'm even talking from healthy to healthier, from greatness to excellence, requires humility. I'll speak to you as a writer. I don't know if any of you write, or it doesn't really matter whether it's writing or it's any form of creativity. The greatest enemy to writing and any skill, and any creative skill, is thinking you're great. Because then you write something and you just rely on your so-called automatic palate skills, and then you get a good few compliments from people who will always compliment you no matter what, or they just got used to you, or that. And Oyevas Epikeris, meaning to love critique, it says that expression, love critique, not just tolerate critique. Now, how many people love critique? You can say you tolerate it, you swallow it like a bitter medicine because it may bring you something, but to love it? Well, to love critique requires humility, and above all, not taking yourself so seriously. If you're a writer, and you're really interested in reaching your readers, rather than you expressing yourself, you'll want it to be written in the most efficient manner. So you're not so trapped in your words, I said it. It's more important to get the message across. So if someone edits your writing and they bring the message out better than you would have, humility should dictate that you should accept that. Arrogance would dictate, no, I'm a better writer. But the fact is, an objective person presented it in a way that communicates it in a better way. Still your ideas. It requires a measure of very strong self-confidence. But that comes together with humility. And many of us, when our egos are more fragile and not that intact, cannot deal with critique. The people with the greatest self-confidence are the people who have the least problems with critique, because they don't see criticism as challenging their personality, the validation of their being is just challenging what they wrote. Most of us, when our work is criticized, we feel we're being criticized. And the truth is, some people who do criticize also don't know how to distinguish between the person and what they're doing. That's a big, big issue today, especially. Sometimes people get into an argument or they disagree, they personalize it. And what starts happening is you start invalidating the person, not just their position. That is a real no-no. That's from a point of view of integrity, is really an inappropriate thing. But we do it all the time. It's because we are either insecure ourselves, but you'll find really secure, intelligent people can argue about something, and does not shake their caring and love for each other. On the contrary, you present an idea, and in the name of clarity, you want to challenge it. That's a healthy approach to any good idea. But that requires trust, and requires the idea of confidence and security that the people who are criticizing mean well, constructive criticism. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we are usually not constructively criticized. People challenge us in order to make themselves look better, or because they just like to tear others down. It has nothing to do with necessarily looking for the truth. So the idea of denial, going back to the idea of Haster Aster Pane, which, by the way, I didn't just mention it, it's actually the name of Esther. Queen Esther comes from the word Haster Aster. Esther means concealed. So it's similar, it's consistent to what I said earlier about the Megillah concealing the miracle. You don't see God in the revealed hand of God. But when you look at the choreography and the end result, you say to yourself, how did all this happen? What would have happened if I go back to that? Well, the king had slept peacefully that night. All the rest of the Megillah would never have happened. Which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but if you know this, but when they read the Megillah in a synagogue, at least if you read it properly, halacha dictates, the Mariel writes this, that the Megillah is read on a lower tone up to that point, where it says, B'layla hu nada doshnas hamelech. When they start reading that night the king's sleep was disturbed, the reader of the Megillah is supposed to start reading it louder, because that's the beginning of the miracle. Interesting. The insomnia of the king is the beginning of the miracle. To show you how a seemingly trivial event, one king not being able to sleep in his bedroom, and who knows if anyone would have even known it, becomes the beginning of the miracle. So in a Megillah reading, we'll read, listen closely, the reader will begin to read louder, in a more upbeat tone from that point on. So the Megillah is in a form of concealment. But the question is whether the concealment is concealed or not. And that's up to us. And that's why I said denial is the first problem in all situations. If you think you have it all figured out, and if you think your life is working, I hope it is. But that doesn't mean that's the real script of your life. So in a strange, or you could say even ironic way, it's when you know your life isn't working is when you're most open to the true script of your life. When you think it is working, your complacency that results from that can really shroud the true story that's unfolding. That's why you find people who are successful and things are working become more apathetic. They take it for granted. That's usually when the biggest mistakes are made, when you're not really vigilant, because it's all working out. Now, God forbid, I'm not suggesting our life shouldn't work. I'm suggesting that even when it's working, don't get deceived. But that's the whole story. There's a deeper story. So it's an interesting thing in the Jewish custom you have during a wedding ceremony at a chuppah. At the end of the ceremony, a strange custom, they break a glass. I don't know if you've ever thought about why would you break a glass at the end of a chuppah? It seems so antithetical. Here you're talking about a union of a beginning of a marriage. You shouldn't be talking about breaking anything. The whole point is there's enough divorce in this world. Why would you want to break a glass? So you have all the different explanations that may the glass be broken and not the marriage. I mean, I'm sure you've heard all the sermons under the different chuppahs about breaking of glasses. Let me share with you one that I think is the real ultimate reason that really explains it. Because why do it then, of all times? So the technical reason is we remember we remember the destruction of the temple. That at all times we should always remember that the temple was destroyed. But the question still remains, why then? You could do it later in the wedding, at the end of the wedding. Why under the chuppah? And here is the story, and it's very much connected to the theme that I'm discussing about the Megillah. And it's a very profound psychological message. That in the highest points of joy in your life, and what greater pinnacle is when a couple is under a chuppah. Usually the battles don't begin till later. Under a chuppah, you'd hope, at least for that moment, it's the height of the relationship. So the height of two people's joy, as they unite as one, and their families, and the best case scenario, we shall say. Judaism teaches us, don't get arrogant in your celebration. Always remember that there may be other people in this world, and other people on this planet that are suffering. And even in your heights of joy, always maintain a certain remembering that the world is not complete. So the breaking of the glass is not, God forbid, to disturb the joy of the couple or the celebration of the wedding. It's just to put things in context. That as happy as we are here right at this moment, and no one's taking away from that, we have to always remember that there are some people who are broken in this world. Now the power of that is not just a nice message. It also teaches us something about humility. Because that then, God forbid, when something happens in a person's life that's not so happy, there too will be reserved a little space that there's some happiness in this world as well. Which means, think of it psychologically, those people that are so consumed with themselves and completely consumed with themselves, when they're happy, 100% celebration, they forget about everybody else. And that same type of person, what happens when something negative happens, they also get completely selfishly consumed. That's all about me, and therefore it's something sad, there's not just room for happiness. You'll always see extremes when there's selfishness. The idea that in my greatest moments of joy, I remembered a person who needed to be remembered that was not completely a joy, in a sense gives you back something in return that, God forbid, the day that you are not in the happiest mode, there's something reserved. It's not just about you, there is some happiness in the world that can enter your life as well. It's like not being convinced that it's all about you and you have it all figured out. That type of humility is the message under a chuppah. So as happy as the couple is, it's ultimately not just about them. There's a bigger picture unfolding. And even the picture of their own lives, as much as they are happy at that moment of the union of a wedding ceremony, they remember there's a world out there and not everything is perfect, and part of our mission is to help repair that world. So when you think of the Megillah in that sense, think of your own life, it's really about stepping back and not taking serious as you usually do everything that happens to you. You know, you get so consumed with the moment that you can forget everything else. It's context. But that context is only possible when a person has really humility. Because if it's all about you, then that moment will take control and you will become obsessed. I'm not suggesting that me saying this to this evening is just going to solve the problem. But if you think about it that way, that there is a script in your life that you're missing sometimes your own story because you're so busy with the details, then in a way it's like it's to your own detriment. How would you like to find out that the things you were praying for and things you were asking for were right there happening to you, but you were too busy to look? You were too busy with the detail. When you realize, as the Megillah tells us, that everything is being choreographed, and you have choices to make based on that. So number one, don't think that your story is all figured out. There's more going on than you think. So it just gives you a little hope and appreciation and humility that there's another script that's playing itself out. And secondly, it gives you the strength to do something about it, instead of being just paralyzed by the moment or by whatever is taking place in your life, whether it's a good thing or it's not such a good thing. So how do we so-called access this inner script? Well, based on what I've said here, first of all, as I said, awareness. You have to be aware, whether you know it or not, that there's something unfolding that you cannot fully see. No question about that. It has to be a given, it has to be as given as the things you do see. And that should not weaken us. It should not make us feel, oh, I don't know what's happening. On the contrary, it should make you feel stronger, because you do know what's happening. You know that you don't know what's happening. That's better than not knowing that you don't know what's happening, you know? So that's already progress. But remember that, as I said, it's half the opening. Once you come to that point, ironically, you begin to know what's happening because you start seeing things emerge. It's small examples of this type of what we call divine providence, or God leads the footsteps of a person. Okay? I don't know how you get to work, but let's say you commute by subway. So every day you're going to be sitting near somebody else usually, right? I mean, I guess you're on the same train, maybe some people are always going, but it doesn't really matter to the point I'm going to make. Now you may think all this is random. Who really cares who's sitting there? Your destination is not the subway or the bus. You want to get somewhere. But the fact is, this is the road that you've been led on. And there are people that are going to come your way. So I'm not suggesting doing this in a corny way and starting to talk to everybody that you see and then say, hey, you think we have a mission here when we're here together on the subway? Don't try that exactly. It's not a good pickup line, you know. But just in a subtle way to appreciate that sometimes there is a reason that perhaps you're sitting near somebody. And again, in a balanced way, just being aware that there are other things. Maybe it's not something you have to say to the person. Maybe it's something you have to observe. Maybe it's something you learn. Maybe they're learning something from you. You know, I always learn things from the ads on the subways, whether it's arthritis doctors or I guess malpractice. You know, they have all these ridiculous ads. I don't know always what the message is, but I'm always looking at them to see if God is sending me a message or two. And sometimes, you know, signs are meant just to be signs to tell you to be open to the next signs. I remember my brother and myself. I'm the oldest of five. We have 5 siblings, and I'm the oldest. So I guess I have 4 siblings. That would be the accurate way to put it. So I once took a long walk on a short plank. No, I'm sorry. A long walk with my brother, my youngest brother. Some of you may know, is a teacher, an orator. And we have 15 and a half years between us, 16 years. So I'm almost like a surrogate father, which has its own therapeutic implications. So we went for this walk. We went out to dinner in Manhattan, the Upper West Side. I don't know if you remember, there was this kosher Mexican place on Amsterdam Avenue. I forgot what it was called. You're all too young to remember that. And after the dinner, we went for a walk, a stroll up Amsterdam Avenue. And he's sharing with me his issues, and I'm sharing some of my reactions. Usually younger siblings have more issues with their older ones than the other way around, because you're the one that was the older one, and you were the one that, whatever, all the grievances. I'm not saying he was wrong, but so we're discussing it. And I say to him, okay, well listen, I don't know if you're asking me for a suggestion or not, but as an older brother, let me give you my suggestion. It may have been the problem, actually. I shouldn't have been suggesting, but I did. So I said, sometimes you have to look out for the signs. God, sometimes you have a challenge or an issue, you look out, God will send you some sign, some answer. Just to be open to it. As we're walking, this is a true story, we look up, and we both look up, we both see, exactly when I finished that sentence about the signs, we see a bar. It's on the west side of Amsterdam and 84th. I don't know if it's still there, it probably is. And the title of it is Jake's Dilemma. And you have this guy with all this wiry hair having a dilemma in the picture. And my brother was called in class by his classmates Jakey. It's Jacobson, so Jakey. They called him Jake. So Jake's Dilemma. So I said to my brother, so you want to go in? He says, I'm not interested in going into the bar. I said, maybe there's something in here for us. Who knows? Jake's Dilemma. God sent you a sign. So we both decided to walk on and say, okay, we just have to keep our eyes open. So we do. And we keep our eyes open, and we walk another 2 blocks. I think it's 86th Street at this point. And on a wall, a big wall, there was this advertisement painted on the wall for Apple computers. And there was a picture, I think, of John Lennon or Einstein or one of these guys. And it says, think different. Okay, so that's it. So I had my signs, and I began to pontificate about how you have to think different. And that's when I coined this line that I use often, that people look for change in their lives. So I always say, if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? So any mathematicians here? You're going to have what you had. Right? If you think what you thought, and you do, and you say what you said, in other words, you're looking for change, and you continue to think what you thought yesterday, you continue to say what you said yesterday, and you continue to do what you did yesterday, there's only one mathematical conclusion. You're going to have what you had yesterday. That's how it goes. If nothing changes on this end, nothing changes on that end. If you want change, you have to initiate it. Add an ingredient, you'll have a different result. Change something, or take out an ingredient. That's how it goes. Or else you'll always have the same result. Throw a ball against the wall, you'll always come back the same way. Unless you throw it a different way, or you throw it in another direction, or a different wall, or whatever. So the point is that we have direct impact on our lives, but we need to be able to look out for the signs. And very often, I would even go beyond I'd say always, your answers are there, but we mostly miss them because we're busy with our own plans and with our own ideas. When you say in Yiddish the expression, a Mensch tracht and Gott lacht, you know that one? How do you translate in English? It doesn't really rhyme in English, but it means a man thinks and God laughs. Now, there must be some English rhyme as well. It means, basically, it's not just meant to be dismissive of our plans. It actually has a profound meaning. It means that you don't know the script of your life. And sometimes the greatest things happen to you precisely when you get out of the way. Because as long as you're in the way with your plans, it's your plans that are taking shape, and not necessarily the greater plan. On the other hand, this doesn't mean that we should completely come in without any plans. So no one should quote me on that. It doesn't mean you should not prepare. It just means you have to do the best you can with your tools, your seichel, with your mind, your heart. But at the end of the day, you have to reserve a certain amount, you can say a certain unknown, to a script that you may not complete. In a sense, if you were to write down your business plan, always leave a few blank lines for God to fill in, or for destiny, if you wish to put it that way, to fill in. To know that there are things that you cannot know, the unknown. In every business plan you have a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, average scenario. But there's a fourth scenario, one that we can't really even imagine. So you can't even call it average or worst or best, because it's a variable that you just didn't figure on. Is it possible to anticipate everything? No, it's not. Obviously, in natural circumstances, you can anticipate certain situations, and we should. When Jacob prepared to meet his brother Esau, who at the time was was his arch enemy, wanted to kill him, Jacob did not know what's going to come. So he sends his messengers. Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, messengers, angels, however you interpret it, and they come back with not a good report that Esav is marching with 400 men. So what does Jacob do? He does the classic thing. He covers all his bases. He prays to God, which is in a sense saying, listen, I don't know what's going to happen here. I need your strength. I need you to help me here. The second thing he does is he prepares a bribe. He prepares a gift to appease Esav. And maybe it'll assuage him and make him feel a little less aggressive. And the third thing he does, he prepares for war. So you can say, hey, if you're such a religious guy, why don't you just trust in God? And what are you preparing for war and preparing to appease him? Pray, and that's it. And go to sleep, and God will take care of it. That's not how it works. We're partners in creation. We're partners in the unfolding of our destiny. So prayer is necessary. It's part of the picture. Not just the other two. But then God helps those that help themselves. You have to create a keli, as they say, a container. You have to do what you can humanly do. You possibly do. Even in the Megillah, you don't have Esther just saying, okay, go pray, fast, and God will save us all. She goes and figures out a whole plot, how to invite them to meals, and to get them to get Haman warmed up, and then finally, the time that she can pounce and tell Achashverosh that they're ready to kill her and the entire Jewish people. She used her mind. She was innovative about it, as was Mordechai in his own way. So essentially it's like covering all the bases. It's covering everything, knowing that there's a dimension we can't figure out. It's like almost knowing that I've done everything I can humanly do, and then and you pray to God, and you be at peace. I've done what I can do now. What happens next, I can't really control. What happens usually with us is we want to control the results. And that is where your own arrogance and self-worship come into play, and you forget that there's another script. Does this always work? It doesn't always work, but it helps weaken the problem. In relationships, this is a big thing. Relationships, when you're having a relationship with another human being, you are inevitably not in complete control. Unless the other human being is unhealthy and completely passive and lets you control them, which would not be necessarily a healthy relationship, you're not in control, because you're not in control how another person is going to react or how they feel. You can be in complete love and ready to go forward and do everything, and the other person is not there, and you can't control it. But you usually see how people become control freaks, and they start maneuvering and manipulating to try to be in control. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do what we can humanly, but there's always an element, especially in love and relationships. It's not our script. If anybody ever thinks that a relationship that's lasting has to do with just two human beings deciding to be together, they're sadly mistaken. Ask any two people who are truly in love for a long period of time. I don't mean for a week. They'll tell you it's a mystery. And you think, for these people, it's a mystery? You've been together, so there must be some secret, something you figured out. They figured out that it's a mystery. That's what they figured out. They figured out that you do what you can, and there's some things you just simply have to let go. There's some things you just accept. There's a humility involved. There's a certain surrender, in a way, to a higher script. That doesn't take away from the love for each other. It doesn't take away what they do for each other. It just adds a dimension that is not purely controlled by people. But we live in this hyper-control world where we have to control it all. Because we're told you have remote control, we're controlling everything. And in this technological world, we feel we have control over everything. We have to not forget one little thing. With all the technologies in the world, one thing has never changed and will never change. It's called the human heart. I don't mean the physical heart, because I understand there's heart transplants and stuff like that. I meant human emotions. A child will always need its mother's embrace. It will never be replaced, not by a Kindle, and not by some virtual mother or by some internet program. Never. I mean, it would be quite sad if anybody ever thought that can happen. And the love that we give each other, yes, you can communicate it through technology, and text messaging, I'm sure, is a great tool to let people know that you care about them, etc., etc. But it's not the beginning and end of love. It's one tool that you use, just like the tool of words or the tool of a telephone. But there are certain things that will never change. And just because our lives are so much easier today, and the standard of living, and we have all kinds of gadgets that make things faster and easier, that's all really quantitative, not qualitative. Once upon a time, yes, it would have taken 1,000 years to crunch the numbers that you can crunch in a split second in a computer. It's purely quantity. I'm not saying that doesn't have implications. It saves tremendous amount of time. All kinds of new developments in business and all kinds of different opportunities possible because of this crunching. But don't ever think it's a qualitative change. It has nothing to do. It doesn't change. Didn't turn humans into angels. It doesn't make us more moral. It doesn't make us less moral necessarily. But it has nothing to do with the main issues of life. It will never take away the pain of death or loss. So if you really want to put things in very stark contrast, think of the most fundamental things in life that we need. The love we need in our lives, the nurturing, especially at a young age. And on the other hand, how we cry or we are in pain. All the technologies of the world make no difference with this. Absolutely no difference. They tell the story in the olden days. Today there's a whole new technology. There was a time when most people were illiterate. Well, I should qualify that because the great Oscar Wilde tells us that that the difference between then and today is not really that there's a lower rate of illiteracy. It's only that today illiterate people know how to read. That's the way he puts it. So, but there was a time where people didn't know how to read. Reading was for the elite, aristocrats, people who were trained, who had the opportunity to go to school, or they had private tutors, or whatever it was. So they hired readers, and when you got a letter, you couldn't read it, you hired someone who read it for you. So Hasidim tell a story which captures a certain truth. That once a letter came to a fellow in a town in Russia. He could not read it. So he hired somebody, paid somebody a few, whatever it is, kopkas, to read the letter for him. Excuse me. As he begins reading, the person who's reading just continues reading on, as if nothing happened. The one who's listening starts crying, to the point that he faints. What was he reading? He was reading about how his father had passed away. The point being made is the one who read it, he just read it like a machine. He doesn't care. It's not his father. The person who couldn't read was the one that fainted and could not deal with it because it was his father. So here's a perfect example how technology meets, so to speak, human emotions. They have absolutely no connection to each other. Not that technology cannot amplify emotions or bring a message to a person faster and easier and stuff like that. But it's important to put this context because not so much you can try to knock technology, it's to understand that we don't have it under control. Life has not changed in any way when it comes to the real issues of emotions, as I said, positive ones, negative ones, challenges like that. Nothing has changed. Those areas will always remain the same lack of control that we have. What we begin to have control over it, ironically, the story of the Megillah tells us, is when we let go. The only place where you can have control in your life is when you let go, is the real areas of life. When it comes to business dealings or anything that's tangible or material, yeah, the stronger you hold on, the more power you have. When it comes to the sublime and ethereal things in life, the more you hold on, the less you have. That's how it is. Think of it like something that slips out of your hands if you try to hold on to it because it's so gentle. So the more coarse something is, the more you can hold on to it, and you have that control. If you try to apply that same tool of control to areas like love, feelings, things that are more, as I said, sublime and ethereal, that are not tangible, the less control you have. How do you get control there? Is by letting go, by surrendering in a way, by saying, I submit to a higher force, I accept. That's not weakness there, it's the strength. I think I've quoted this more than once. When Moses speaks to God, and one of the most emotional dialogues you'll ever read, if you read it closely in the Bible. We read it, one second, what parsha are we now? Next week. Next week we'll read it. Moses says to God at some point, they were on the mountain, and this is when Moses is praying for forgiveness for the people. So Moses says to God, Hareini na chvedecha, show me your face, or show me your glory. And that's when God says the immortal words. God says, Lo yireini adam v'chai. No person can see me and live. And then this verse continues and says that God continues and tells Moses, but however, Re'isa es acherai, I will show you, and you will see my back. But my face you will not see. So the obvious question is, several questions here. You'll see the significance in a moment. First of all, Moses was a pretty smart man. He did not understand that one cannot see God's face and remain alive. God had to enlighten him on that. It's a pretty obvious thing. If you are God, if you can see God, you are God. If you want to remain you, you're not going to be able to see God. And then what is this addition? Once God said to him, no one can see my face and live, and exist basically, and remain an independent reality, why did God have to rub it in? He said to him, I'll show you my back, which was a form of, that's what I can show you. And he adds again, Upana layero, my face, however, you will not see. It's like almost telling him, rubbing it in and saying, my face you will never see, no matter what. So the way, one of the answers given, this is written by the, it'll come to me in a minute, the commentary, the Baal HaFlaw. He says the following, that the way you're supposed to read the verse, the second verse, is the comma is supposed to be placed in a different place. When God says, V'ri'isa sacheri, you'll see my back, that's not where you're supposed to pause. V'ri'isa sacheri upanai, you will see my back and my face. But my face you will see by lo yiro, by not looking. That's the way the verse is supposed to be read. There are things we experience in life, we'll call it in scientific terminology through interpolation. It means you can directly witness it. You see it. You can empirically study a table, an object, a phenomenon, and come to certain conclusions. But there are things in life you can only extrapolate. You can never see them. And only by not looking can you experience them. What God is saying to Moses was, you can experience me, but not as long as you think you're in control, and as long as you think you're looking. If you want to see it on your terms, it'll never happen. If you're ready to suspend your terms, and lo yiro, and not look with your eyes, you'll see it. So there are things that that emerge in our lives when we stop looking. It's not something that we like to hear, because we like to be in control. We want to have both, the best of both worlds. Why can't I look and see it? But it doesn't work that way. There are some things that defy human vision. And the only way you can see is by closing your eyes. Which is why we close our eyes in very special moments. Whether it's intentional or not, we close our eyes because some experiences are just beyond the human vision. And that doesn't make them less of the experience. It actually is more intense. So the human eyesight itself cannot even contain such an experience. And there are experiences that we experience in silence more than we do in words. So initially it sounds weird because we'd say, what do you mean? Words are tangible, I can hear the words, I understand them, I communicate. That's not the truth. There are silences that express much more than any word can ever express. And the list goes on. There are many, many examples of this. So when we talk about the story of our lives, in context of the story of Purim, so firstly there's a hidden script absolutely in each of our lives. You can begin to see it when you let go and you start being aware that you're not so aware of everything. That does not make you less knowledgeable or less aware, it makes you wiser. The second thing that's vital is to have friends and others that can help you. Because it's very difficult to look at yourself when you're in the forest, as I said, to see the forest for the trees. It's very hard to do that when you're in the woods or you're living on the ground level. Another person can help step back, look at perspective. I know very basically, even for myself, sometimes I'm so consumed with something, I'm so involved, and I just go to somebody that knows nothing of what's going on, and I just say, can I just share with you the latest events or give them the story? And just the fact that firstly I have to say it from the outset and not take anything for granted, it's one benefit. The second is the other person just can give you a perspective because they're not in the moment. So they know where to look at it and say, well, you know something? It seems to me this is the most important thing. We can get caught up in the emotions of the moment and forget sometimes what the priorities are. All of us, that's part of life. That's called being emotionally involved. It's not per se a bad thing. It's just, you have to remember that your passion and your energy can blind you. Or sometimes not allow you to focus on what are the key elements. You ever get into a long conversation and you have all kinds of plans and ideas, it gets so convoluted it's always good to go back and say, what are my 1, 2, 3, 4 basic points? What do I really want to get across? I mean, it happens all the time. In Kabbalistic terminology, it goes like, Chokhmah is the point of departure of every idea. It's a spark of an idea. Bina, on the other hand, is when you begin to elaborate and embellish on it, and you can go off in so many different directions to the point you forget where you began from, where you began. And if you don't write down where your beginning point, you sometimes can never return. I'm sure you've had this. I've had this happen to me. I mean, now I know, so I always make sure to write down as soon as I started the journey. But what happens is you suddenly say, where did we begin? What was the first point? Why are we here in the first place? And sometimes you really don't know. Has ever happened to you? And that's a perfect example of getting caught up in the trees and forgetting the forest. Sometimes you need another person to help you with that. So we have here before us, coming Sunday, an opportunity. In a way, the day Purim, as I said earlier, begins tonight, tomorrow, with the Fast of Esther. An opportunity to look at our lives in a new way. And the story of the Megillah, as I said, is a story of our own lives. There's an interesting statement in the Mishnah, in the Talmud. It says, "Hakoira sa Megillah mafreya lo yotza," which is like a very weird statement. It means if you read the Megillah backwards, it's not considered as if you read it. You didn't perform the mitzvah. Now tell me, do you ever think of anybody who's going to want to read the Megillah backwards? Why would anyone want to read a book from the back to the front? It's one thing you want to peek at the end. Do you ever see anybody read a book backwards? So why would the Mishnah or the Talmud come up with such a... I don't understand the Talmud is an intricate, like almost like a legal contract. So every scenario is covered, including reading a Megillah backwards. But still, it's quite a very far out situation that someone want to read a Megillah backwards. So the Baal Shem Tov actually gives a fascinating interpretation of it. He says like this, reading a Megillah backwards, he interprets as follows. Reading it as if the end happened later than the beginning. Meaning, we live today a few thousand years from the time it happened. So when you read it backwards, what's happening really is, what was the last thing that happened? It was the end of the Megillah. So in essence, we're thinking of it as a story that happened back then. So the last thing is first, from our perspective, when you look backwards. Baal Shem Tov says you're supposed to read a Megillah as if it's unfolding right now, from the beginning to the end. As if the story is beginning right now and going to the end. Not as if it's a story that happened then and it ended, and you're not just repeating it again. You follow? So that way, the whole meaning of reading a Megillah backwards really means reading it as if it's an event in the past, as opposed to an event of the present. You say, Bayomim Ahem, Bizman Hazeh. That those events happened then, but they also happen again now. There's actually a verse in the Megillah that says, Hayomim Ha'ela, Niskarim V'nasim. It says, these days shall be remembered, and V'nasim is a strange word. It literally means to be acted upon. But the Arizal, Isaac Luria asks the question, what does the word V'nasim come to add? These days shall be remembered. V'nasim also implies created. These days shall be created or recreated. And he says that time is a spiral, and these events actually are recreated every time, this time of the year. The same events that happened, the same energy that flowed the first Purim back in those days is flowing this Purim on Sunday. So we're not just remembering and commemorating a miracle or a story that happened once, we are recreating the story in our own lives. So essentially you can think of Purim as being your story, your salvation, your redemption, and all the details that are choreographed are ready, are in place, waiting for you to make the final connections. Rising to the occasion when you have the opportunity, being humble and recognizing that there's the deeper script, and reaching out to others in the same way. Purim's theme is also unity. Haman said, this nation is spread among all, this one nation is spread all over, but they're connected by their same traditions. So Haman wanted to destroy, and we counted the destruction through unity. So the holiday of Purim is celebrated through all kinds of unifying ways, whether it's the meal that we join others with, celebrating, sending gifts to each other, to neighbors and friends, and at the same time also helping those that are more needy than ourselves. So all that is all symbols of unity that is ultimately the ultimate antidote to any crisis. And there are many more messages that I can go on, but we want to we can't go on till Purim here, right? Not going to work. So I want to just conclude on this note and say that personally, I have seen this in my own life, and I've seen it in the life of many of you here in this room, and also online. I don't know who's online, but some of you I know. That in a way, the dots of our lives have intersected. Just the mere fact that we're sitting here this evening means that we are meant to be here. What we do with this intersection or this interaction is another story, but the fact is, for me, it's a very humbling and sacred experience to be able to be part of your spiritual journey. And I hope you feel the same way with me. So, in a way, it's like stepping back, that despite all the plans that we may have, there are sometimes things that happen that if you allow it to emerge, unbelievable things can happen. I remember years and years ago when I wore the clothing of a younger man. And this class began, it's in the early 80s of the century, the 20th, just in case you're wondering. And it was a choice that was made by myself, and not only by myself, by others as well, to sit together. As I mentioned many times, this group got together. It was just a small group around the table in my office and later in my home until we came to Manhattan. It's a whole journey of its own to be discussed one day. It's a Megillah, more than a Megillah, it's several Megillahs. But what happened was, both myself and others, and from completely different backgrounds. I came from my background, and the people who come into that class, and as yourself, come from perhaps different backgrounds. One thing we all recognized, even though we didn't put our finger on it at the time, that there was something special happening that you really couldn't have planned. It wasn't planned. It was, one guy was looking for some inspiration. A friend suggested he speak to me. I wasn't doing this. It wasn't like I was teaching or giving classes. I was writing. I was living in a very, I would say, surrounded in a very scholarly and academics environment of writing and publishing pretty heavy and dense Torah stuff at that time. But someone called me and they wanted to meet. I was always trained and taught, if someone wants something, why not? If that could be of any help, I'll try. And it was never planned. I had no clue what's going to happen. It wasn't planned. We didn't even give each other phone numbers. That's to the extent. Forget about databases and mailing lists. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. So we would come together once every week. I think it was Thursday night then. Jeff is a witness. He also wore clothing of a younger man then, right? Is that correct? But I think in a way we become younger too, not only older. And we just let it happen. It was fascinating because in a way it was for all of us. And I look back now, like the story of Purim, and I see that just not trying to control it, letting communication take place. I did not have a set script of what I'm going to say. Every week was another story. This one would come in with their things, and we would just compare notes, and we'd argue, and this. And sometimes we sat till 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, people without day jobs, or maybe some people with, but they found this important. And there was a lot of people from the music industry, and it was really unbelievable, magical. And in many ways, has continued to be the same, for me at least. I don't know about for all of you. But, and I can just be as a witness of in a small microcosm, that when you let things happen, unbelievable things come out of it. I would not be the person I am today. We wouldn't be sitting here. Every one of you here, this class is not advertised. It's only friends tell friends. It's on his own word of mouth. And it's all linked to the people that were here through the years. At this point, we do exchange emails, so we have some form of continuity, but hopefully doesn't in any way undermine the spontaneity as well. So I just say it as an example, and I have absolute confidence and belief that every one of us here, I don't think it's unique to me, every one of you can do exactly the same thing. It may not be that you have to lead a class, or that you do it in one way or another, but in your own little way, if you allow certain things to start emerging, that are not exactly all pre-planned and scheduled and controlled, you'll see unbelievable magical things will happen. And that could be just opening up your home maybe once a month, or with some friends alternating and having a class at home, just sitting and getting together and talking. It could be whether it's a Shabbat dinner and guests. I mean, there are many, many ways. It's just initiating things that are not something that necessarily fit into your regular busy business schedule. Something human, with human touch, with a spiritual side to it, with heart, you'll see unbelievable things happen to your life. It opens up doors and can help you even in the things that you may think that you don't have solutions yet to. This can be the solution. It may not be direct solution, but it just opens up. Remember, when things are tangled in your life, there's one way is to try to untangle it and force it open. Another way is to bring in new energy, fresh air. And fresh air always heals infections and brings in new opportunities and possibilities. We don't always know exactly how, but just bringing fresh air in always going to bring something special. If nothing else, it creates some change, some shift from getting out of old habits and patterns and routines. So that's what Purim is about. A little spontaneity, a little not planned spontaneity, a little spontaneity, a little joy, a little spunk. So I wish you all to open yourselves up a little like that. As they say, turn yourselves inside out and outside in and upside down and right side up on Purim, with masks, without. And hopefully it opens up a door in each of us. I give you my blessing that it should. And recognize that there's another script taking place simultaneously, a little beneath the surface, where the drama of your life is playing itself out, and you can contribute a verse. So thank you very much, everybody, and everyone have